Here's Ray.
Okay, well, welcome to Ray Moore Live, and we're glad to be with you again the day after Memorial Day. We're trying to work hard at having good content and topics that would appeal to people and keep them coming back for more. We have lined up about 35 or 40 programs, and we have some variation. We kind of know where we're going to go for the next week, but we have topics, for months actually. And I've been doing this ministry, the Exodus Mandate Ministry, over 20 years. And so I've got drawers full of documents and articles and books and different things that we can feature and talk about. And of course, our mission, the Exodus Mandate mission statement, is to grow, advance K-12 Christian education and homeschooling by getting Christian families, churches out of the public school system into Christian education. So that's basically what we do. And most of the interviews and topics that we have will be related to that in some way, but we can, branch out into other things. I think we have a special program today that might interest you. We're going to be interviewing and talking to one of our state coordinators, Carl Priest, from Polka, West Virginia, which is in the Charleston, West Virginia area. He's been working with this ministry officially as our state coordinator in West Virginia over 10 years. We were trying to figure exactly how long it's been. It may be 12 years now. And it's really given us a good presence there in the state of West Virginia. But there's a backstory with Carl, and I didn't really find this out about him until we've been working together a few years. He was involved in the Kanawha County textbook protest movement that started in Charleston area, West Virginia, in 1974. And that was a big moment in the kind of the beginning era of the Christian right movement, or sometimes called the conservative and pro-family movement. And he was a young teacher in the public school system, just out of the Navy, and he joined in with the protesters. So we're going to talk a little bit about that. We're going to talk about the Dreyfus Award. We have created an award in Frontline Ministries Exodus Mandate called the Robert Dreyfus Award, and it's to honor our Florida State Coordinator, Dr. Robert Dreyfus, and he's been with us since 2004. He's a retired dentist and has had a pretty illustrious career in dentistry in the state of Florida. He invented a device that helps with pain in dental offices when people are not able to use Novocaine and some of the drugs that minimize pain. And I understand at one time that invention of his has been used in some 15% of dental offices around the nation. We didn't give him the name the award for Dr. Dreyfus because of his invention, but he is a very educated man, a professional man, and a real strong in his profession of dentistry. But most importantly to us, he's had over 40 years working in Florida, dealing with the crisis in K-12 public education. So we created this award and named it after Dr. Dreyfus, and we've given it for 10 years, maybe 11 now. And we're going to go back and review some of these other awardees tomorrow. But today we're going to talk about Carl Priest, because he got the award at our 2017 banquet, which was celebrating 20 years with the Exodus mandate. And so Jared, if you could put the picture of Dr. Dreyfus up, he's award is named for him, and then we'll look at the award and talk about Carl's role. Okay. You got okay. All right. So this is Dr. Robert Dreyfuss. He's like me. He's getting along in years, but a tremendously faithful man who is very an educated man, a solid Christian, and who's given his life, particularly in the state of Florida, for the Christian children of Florida, and really works with us on a national basis as well. And I wanted to honor really a preeminent volunteer in our movement. Here's a man who is not recent to this fight. He joined our organization in 2004 after the Southern Baptist Convention resolution battle. And he's been with us all these years. He's written some articles and memos and things that we use in the movement. He's just filled with many wonderful ideas for strategy and tactics to advance the movement. Okay, so can we go ahead and post a picture of the award that Carl got? Okay, all right. This is the picture of the award, and Carl is a recipient. I think the 11th recipient. We've been given it quite a few years, and we created it to honor activist people who stand up courageously, frequently against the tide of their area they live in, to stand for Christian principles, and particularly to be involved in advancing K-12 Christian schooling and homeschooling. And so Carl received this award October 26, 2017. And anyway, we're going to talk a little bit about some of the things that he's accomplished in a book he's written. But I have a famous quote from Arthur O'Shaughnessy, which I think sort of typifies what we're hoping to accomplish in our ministry and our movement. And it goes like this: on one man's soul it hath broken a light that doth not depart, and his look or word he has spoken wrought flame in another man's heart. And this is basically the idea is that what we do, standing up for God and for truth and his word, standing up for the children, may inspire other people to join us and to take courageous stands. Can you show a picture of Carl receiving the award? Me handing the award to Carl. Yeah, that was October 26, 2017 in Columbia, South Carolina at our 20th anniversary banquet. And of course, we mentioned already in previous interviews that Cal Thomas was our banquet speaker. We had about 280 people attend. It was a really nice affair to remember 20 years of service. All right, some of the highlights of the award. Carl taught mathematics over 34 years, and he was 4 years an elementary school principal. This is in the public school system in West Virginia. He's also a strong leader in West Virginia on creationism. He's sort of known as, he has his own website called Insect Man. He's published articles on the insects and how that itself shows it cannot be evolution. Importantly, he was involved in the 1974 textbook controversy, and this made national news. It was a big national news story in 1974, where the textbooks in Kanawha County, which is Charleston area, and I'm sure it was true statewide, were really infected with a lot of ideas and stories that were contrary to traditional values and Christian faith. Even back in the 70s, some of the things that people are complaining about, it was happening in the textbooks at that time. So we got Carl here today, and I'm going to go ahead and start talking to him. Let me show the book that he wrote. Can you see that, Darren? Okay. This is called Protester Voices, a 1974 textbook tea party. There's been a lot written. there's been a lot written about this over the years, most of it negative, attacking these conservatives who protested the textbooks. Carl was a young teacher. How old would you have been in those days, Carl?
I was approximately 27.
Okay, and it was led by Alice Moore, and we're going to talk about her later. She became really the first national heroine of the pro-family Christian right movement. She was a pastor's wife, and she had been elected to the school board, and she led that battle. And we're going to talk about her, but today we want to talk about Carl and some of the things he was doing. So he joined in, unlike most of the public school teachers who were probably even liberal in those days. He was not, and he participated with it. And so he's written the definitive book from a traditional and conservative point of view about this movement. And we are featuring it in our office. And you can get a copy if you contact us. You can call the office at area code 803-714-1744, or you can email the office at exodusmandate@gmail.com. I'm not sure if it's posted as an item on our webpage right now. We had it in the past, but if you can go to the webpage at exodusmandate.org, and if you see it there, you can order it. If you don't, you can just contact us with the phone number and also the email of the office, exodusmandate@gmail.com. I remember the time I was a student in Grace Theological Seminary in the mid-'70s, and I watched this unfold in West Virginia with great interest as a young seminary student. I would watch it on TV at night and read about it in the papers. And I don't know how much it influenced me. We had started homeschooling a few years later, but it's possible that incident sort of might have pushed me and Gail into the homeschooling our own children later on in the 70s. Carl, kind of reconstruct a little bit of what happened, and you might talk about a little bit of the national implications of it too, because it was a big national news story.
Well, Ray, as you said, Alice Moore first noticed, and this is a God thing from the very beginning, but she first noticed what was happening in the textbooks. Previously, textbooks were just selected and board members didn't even see them, and that's how it was done. Well, she happened to take a look at the books, and at this time, we think is when I'm not a conspiracy theorist, but we think that the powers that be were trying to insert themselves into the public schools. And they chose West Virginia, maybe a couple other districts, but in West Virginia, Alice Moore happened to catch what they were doing and called them out on it. And before long, other people realized what was happening thanks to her going around and talking wherever she could. And one thing led to another.
And it was a big national news story, even went international. Of course, the fake news or the liberal media was dominant in those days, and so they didn't agree with you, right, Carl? And they spent a lot of time attacking Alice Moore and her friends like Carl Priest.
Yeah, I like to say we were the first victims of fake news. If we weren't the first, we were among the first. It was vicious. New York Times did a lot of articles. Of course, you know, the New York Times is a leftist news media outlet. And for example, I just found something a couple of days ago, 2017, from a Canadian newspaper about the textbook war. And that is one of the worst articles I've ever seen as far as propaganda. And it was written by a so-called research librarian. He shames the term research and brings disgrace to the profession of librarian. For example, here's one thing he says in it. Alice Moore was neither an educator. Well, that's true. Then he goes on, that's a comma, board member. She was a board member or even a parent, and she was a mother of children in the system. That is an example of not just a mistake, I call it an outright lie.
Well, we know they lie routinely, and if
Yeah.
they don't lie about us, they leave out, vast amounts of information. So they misreport. The best thing you can say about them is that they ignore the truth and bring in their own interpretation.
Yeah, and unfortunately, there were some incidences of violence, and I take those in context in the book and also on the web page called Protester Truth, and but they feature those things, and they fail to mention that the worst incidents of violence were against the protesters.
Yes. Also, what happened? It was a big story for a couple of years, and a lot of the national pro-family, pro-life, and conservative leadership took great notice of it. Connie Marshner, Larry Pratt, some of these leaders spoke up on behalf of Alice Moore and the 5 preachers. There were 5 preachers that were involved in the leadership. Unlike a lot of our preachers today who won't take a stand, these were 5 really wonderful men who led their flocks. Can you give their names out, Carl? They're written up in the book, but there was Alice Moore and the 5 faithful preachers.
Well, first of all, 2 of them are deceased. That's Ezra Grayley and Henry Thaxton. Still living are Ava Seal, Marvin Horn, and Charles Quigley. And all 5 of those men suffered tremendously for what they did, especially Marvin Horn, who I say was railroaded into prison because he was the key leader. The other guys had a lot to do with it, but he was the one that the media focused on.
And Carl gives a great explanation of the abuse of justice that took place with Marvin in the book. And of course, we're now seeing how the legal system, particularly at the federal level, is capable of all kinds of injustices. We're just amazed to see some of the things that are going on in our federal government today. So that was happening in 1974 and 75 in West Virginia, and it kind of caught people by surprise. But then we don't need to go into the details of that. It's in the book. But the 5 preachers really helped carry the ball with Alice Moore.
Let me point out something, Ray. I wrote about half of the book, and about half of it I transcribed what the preachers and Alice Moore, mothers and minors, told. That's why I call it Protester Voices. They got to tell their side of the story. So anybody that wants to see what these people had to say, including Marvin Horn, it's in the book.
One reason it went international with news was the coal miners went out on strike in support of Alice Moore and the 5 preachers because of the damage to their children in the textbooks. And they really put pressure on the economy. And I have a friend here in town who was actually, he was not saved at the time. He's a real strong Christian now, but he was a student, I believe, at West Virginia University at the time. And just not a believer, and it really made an impression on him. He said, wow, these people really believe in God. And it made an impression. I don't know if it led to his salvation indirectly, but he was touched as a non-Christian to see the coal miners go out on strike as a result of the textbooks. We need to move along real quickly here because we're running really out of time. But what happened was that it became a national news story, and even President Ronald Reagan, later in his career, I believe it was after he was elected president, said that this incident in West Virginia helped rally conservatives, Christians, and pro-family people around the nation and lead to his election as president. So we can see sometimes little things that we do can really have national implications. So Carl was part of that as a young man, and now he's working with us in the Exodus Mandate, and we're just so proud to have him. I remember when we talked years ago about him joining with us, and I didn't find out until a couple of years after he was working with us that he was part of that. And I remember being said, wow, we've got somebody on our staff and in our organization that was part of the Kanawha County textbook controversy. I should say controversy, protest. So anyway, we're going to talk a little bit now, and we want to thank Carl for what he's done. And I don't know if we've talked enough about his credentials, but he's a highly credentialed man, a professional man, an educator, now retired from public school after 30 years. And he pretty much gives us a significant amount of his time in retirement working for Christian schooling and homeschooling in the state of West Virginia. And Carl, let's talk a little bit about some of the activities that you do. Give us a little bit.
Wherever a door opens, Ray, I'll go through it. Our friend from the Huntington station, his name slips my mind now. Help me out there. Anyway,
Roten, R-O-T.
Yeah, Tom Roten. He's had me on his show a couple of times. I've been to maybe 3 churches, and one of those addresses to the Hurricane Bible Church is on my YouTube channel if anybody wants to hear it.
Yeah, he's got a good sermon there. You can actually play that and listen to it.
I help the homeschoolers and Christian schools any way I can. And I have to say this, this happened before I left the teaching profession. Homeschoolers have tremendous things going for them. I was the math field day coach and the chess team coach, and we would go to tournaments. And when homeschoolers came in, I was impressed with their intelligence and their social ability. So that's the first time I came in contact with homeschoolers.
Homeschooling is growing in West Virginia. Let me say that Carl, again, is a professional educator. He was 30 years in public education as a Christian, and he was faithful in that environment as much as he could express himself. And 4 years, he was a principal of an elementary school. So he's got a lot of experience. And what your field was science and mathematics. Is that right?
Mine was math, but my hobby was science, especially the insects. And that's how I got involved with the creation issues.
He's periodically gets featured in the papers in West Virginia. I think the West Virginia Gazette attacks him fairly often, which is a good thing because it gives him identity. You know, if you get attacked by the left, that's not a bad thing, because many of our people know the media is so corrupt. So if you get attacked, it gives you popularity with godly people. So Carl, you've been attacked a few times by him, right?
I have. Well, the Gazette mockingly called me West Virginia's #1 enemy of evolution, and I have taken that title and worn it proudly.
Yeah, well, good for you on that. And as you know, Exodus Mandate is a creation, this oriented ministry. Let me say one thing that's happened here that's kind of interesting. This event, the Kanawha County textbook protest, took place in 1974 and 75. And after a few years, it kind of died away. But then scholars, even on the left, not friendly to us, began to study it again afresh 20 years later, right, Carl?
That's correct.
20 years later, these liberal scholars brought it back up. And one was a young man named Trey Kay, who grew up in Kanawha County, and he was a child when this event took place. And I think his family really was sympathetic to the schools and not to the protesters.
That's
Tell
correct.
about that.
That's correct. Well, Trey Kay is a very talented in the
Documentary producer, right?
documentary. Yeah, he did a great documentary called The Great Textbook War on National Public Radio. And I always say about Trey, he's the fairest we've ever been treated, and it was about a 52-48 bias against us, and we were
That's
happy.
pretty good, Carl. That's good.
But there's still articles coming out. I just found one recently by a scholar published by West Virginia University talking about the national significance of the textbook controversy.
I went through the the West Virginia State Museum in the Capitol years ago, where they basically have the history of West Virginia. They actually have a section in that museum about this controversy. Well, what happened? Trey K, and I can't remember the year. It's probably after the year 2000, but he went back and did a documentary on this, and he got 2 national awards. I think the Peabody Award and the Edward Murrow Award.
Yes.
For bringing this back around 30 years later, and it became a national news story a second time. And so Carl decided at that point to write this book, because most of the information that was being discussed was so one-sided. And he wrote the actual true story of the events from a traditionalist and conservative and Christian point of view. Now, he's objective. He doesn't cover over some of the negative things that might have happened on our side, but he tells the truth. To Trey K's credit, he was pretty fair. I looked at some of his materials, and it made big story in New York City. And he actually got criticized by the left because he was fair. They didn't like what he did. And he was pretty honorable. And I actually complimented him because he told the truth. Now, he tended to favor the school system, but Carl has met him, and I think Carl's even testified to him, and we've tried to be warm and friendly with him, primarily because he was honest about it. But that became a big deal, and if you're interested, you could probably Google the Kanawha County textbook controversy, and there's a lot on the internet about it, and you could go back and look at the events from 1974 and 1975.
And Ray, I don't want to omit that the movie Indoctrination has something on it, including something that happened several years later that is mind-boggling.
Okay, very good. Yes, thanks for reminding me of that. We included this story that we're talking about now in the outstanding documentary Indoctrination. If you're interested in that, you can go to indoctrinationmovie.com. Carl is interviewed there. We have pictures of Alice Moore and some of the issues of that time. And in some ways, even though we didn't intend it, Exodus Mandate is sort of carrying on their legacy. I kind of adopted that later. I wrote the foreword in this book, and I was really proud of that. And don't have time to read it now, but I kind of tell the story and how it affected me when I was a student in seminary in the mid 70s. So we're kind of carrying on their legacy. And as we mentioned earlier, 2 of these ministers have passed on. Alice Moore is still living in near, I think, Memphis, Tennessee. And 3 of the preachers are still living. And of course, Carl is with us today. He's still living, but he was just a boy in his early 20s in 1974. Carl, you have anything you want to add?
I want to say this regarding the Dreyfus Award. He's truly a great man, and he has a lot of literature, as you mentioned, that people should take a look at. But the award I received was on behalf of these people, these mothers and miners and preachers, and just good people you want to have as your neighbors. That's what the textbook protesters were. I think the award may be published on our webpage, but you can also, if you want to write the office, at exodusmandate@gmail.com, or call the office at area code 803-714. We will include a printed copy of the
Dreyfus Award given to Carl Priest in the information. Just ask us for what you want, and we'll be glad to send it to you. This is very interesting reading, and I know Carl is proud of it. This is the only book that tells honestly and fairly the traditional Christian side of that argument. But even the left, much as they do not like what Carl and his colleagues did in 1974, they acknowledge it as a pivotal moment in modern American history. And so we're so proud to have Carl working with our ministry, and we're glad to have him on today. Any of our guests can join in if they have a question or something. We have a few minutes left, I think. Okay. All right. Well, hey, it's good to be with you again today. And you can always send raymorelive.com out to your friends and alert them, and they can go back and listen to the program later. And we're grateful for that. Thank you for tuning in today. And this is my story, and I'm sticking with it. Thank you.